So Rin and Knives reached out to me recently and asked me if I wanted to be involved in their Road to Overland Expo East this year. It takes place in October of this year, 2022. I jumped on the opportunity, and the project for that Road to Overland Expo is this 2007 Ford Explorer. It's riding currently on a stock street suspension, but today we're going to upgrade it to some Rancho Struts. So being this vehicle has about 120,000 miles on it and was still running on the factory Ford Struts, it was definitely time to change them. The ride was getting horrible, and it's also not good for the rest of the suspension components when the struts are bad. This particular vehicle happens to be a 2007 Ford Explorer, and aftermarket parts are not plentiful for this thing at all. So I was quite excited to find out that Rancho actually made struts for it. Captured. I just gotta nail that. This particular vehicle started life in Michigan, and I don't mean that's where it was made. I mean that's where it spent about the first 10 years of its life. And if you know anything about northern vehicles, with northern vehicles comes a little bit of rust, or in this case, a lot of rust. And that was a challenge for taking the old struts out. Gave it all the ugga-duggas. No, and then the wrench just turns, the nut's just crumbling. Rust causes a lot of structural issues, but also when you go to replace parts, whether you're going to an aftermarket part or even just a replacement part, that rust causes problems with fastener removal, just generally moving around in there, things get stuck. Also got the nut off there. Didn't drop my stuff. But I bet if I compress that spring while it's still in the truck. Well, it's not because it's surface rusty, but nothing's moving. Like, there's no play in any of this stuff. Because of the rust, I'm gonna have to get creative. And possibly a tetanus shot. There she is. That's what I'm talking about. Finally, that's a sense of relief. That took way too long. Now I'm going to jump over to the driver's side and release that upper ball joint in hopes that I can gain enough flexibility out of the lower control arms to be able to get the strut in and out. And that, of course, is due to the sway bar. Oh, this one might have me beat. Rip it up! Really stuck. Working on a vehicle with this much rust, I have to do something to preserve it. So while I'm taking parts in and out, I'm going to go ahead and use some Rust-Oleum rust reformer spray, as well as some chassis paint, just to try to seal it up and help it in the future. Now that that's out, it's going to be a smooth ride through the rest of the project. I've done a few sets of struts in my time. I don't do them every day, but I do them often enough that I am familiar with them. But yet every time I do them, there's still that anxiety and that thought in my head, please God, don't let me die today. Because those springs are under a lot of pressure. Please do not let your struts get this bad. With the spring compression taken off of the old strut, you want to keep that compressed until you get it safely put onto the new strut. In our case, we also use new hats, which is the portion with the bushings and sometimes the bearings at the top of the strut. Now that I have the hat, which is also known as a strut mount, secured to the new strut, I can let the tension out of the spring, making sure that the spring is seated into the rubber bushings. It's time to get the new ones in. While I'm putting these new struts in, it has some pros and cons. Of course, the pros being they're clean, they're rust-free, it's brand new hardware. But the cons are when you're taking things out, a lot of times gravity helps you get them out. And as you're trying to put new parts in, you have to hold things and you need a third arm sometimes. I usually end up using my feet, my knees, my legs, whatever I can get in there to relieve the pressure off the suspension to get the parts in there. I truly love Rancho's quality in the equipment that they build, and I'm very excited to see what the ride quality change is in the vehicle now that we've gotten those old shocks out of there and these brand new fresh Ranchos in. Good morning, it's day 2 on the project for the Road to Overland Expo East. After a little bit of sleep and something to eat, it's time to move on to the rear end of the vehicle. Now the front end did take a little longer than initially anticipated because of the amount of rust and of course just the overall mileage on the vehicle. Things were good and stuck. Hopefully though, the rear end is going to be a little bit more forgiving. Oh, all right. As the dust falls out of the wheel. 3 on the top, yeah. Yeah, you can't get an impact or anything on there, so that's going to be fun. The rear struts on this vehicle come with their own challenges, and that challenge is the spacing where they are is super tight because of the pinch weld of the rear fender. The gapping wasn't very big to get the hands in and out of there. Wow. How in the world do they expect you to get to that? Hit this like a million times. Probably should have thought ahead and did this last night. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab the impact wrench and head over to the other side and pull that wheel off so I can start putting some PB Blaster on those bolts. So hopefully it'll start to free up before I get to that side. I'm wondering how those engineers ever even imagined somebody getting in here to do this. I think maybe stainless brush. I can't even get a ratchet. I mean, there's nowhere to swing it. Turned. It turned. Yeah, this is gonna fight me all the way because these threads are so full of.
One.
I'll just finish it with my fingers. They're like so rusted that they're like swollen. I expect you to take it to Ford, and then Ford charges you multiple hours to do it. This one is like really, really, really rusted. Typically, I am very mild-mannered. I don't get frustrated very often, but at this moment, I am frustrated. If there was enough room, I'd put the blue wrench in there and take it off. But it is time for the reciprocating saw. Doing something. Is it just bending the capture? When you have rusty hardware and rusty bolts, it's generally hard to get them out anyway. But in this case, it wasn't just about them being rusty. These fell into the category of holy crap, they're tight. I ended up having to put the breaker bar onto the fastener and resort to putting my floor jack under the breaker bar, risking breaking the breaker bar to get those bolts to break loose. When that bolt finally snaps loose, yeah, you have a small coronary. Because you don't know, did the bolt break loose or did the tool break? But it was a success, and finally that bolt is loose. We can get it out and proceed with this job. There it is. Well, that one fought me, but she's out. I will be installing a lift kit on this vehicle. And of course, now would be the time to do it, right? The struts are already out. Just stick the lift kit in at the same time. But the reason that I decided not to, first of all, this particular vehicle does not have an option for lifted struts or extended struts. And if I put the struts and the lift kit in at the same time, with as many miles that are on this vehicle, if something isn't right, then we don't know if we're going to blame the lift kit or the struts. So by doing this in 2 phases, we get the struts in there and then we know everything is okay, and at a later date, install the lift kit. And remember, kids, if it don't fit, don't force it. Use a bigger hammer. And now I'm going to move to the other side. I'm giving it the focal end. The bolts on this side were just as tight as the other side, but I think it would have been even worse had I not pre-soaked them with PB Blaster. The assembly of the rear is pretty much the same as the front. However, you don't have some pieces in the way like the upper control arm. But the rear is a little bit more inconvenient just because of the lack of space to get your big meat paws in there. Well, it's been a long couple of days, but that is all four wheels complete. My PSA to you is don't let your struts or shocks or really anything on your vehicle get to be this bad before you replace it. With maintenance type items, unfortunately you don't get that satisfaction when you replace them of the vehicle being faster or better looking or better fuel economy, but it does make it safer, so it's still worth doing. In our case, we needed to replace these struts before the lift kit goes in. This was a fun project. It was a hard project. I took a lot of knuckle breaking. I took a lot of dirt and grime, but it was worth it in the end. I have heard from the owner, and I know that the vehicle is running beautifully smooth. It drives perfectly down the road, and that makes me feel good. That means in the near future, we're gonna get to put that lift kit in and finally get to the aftermarket parts. But unfortunately, that's gonna be the end of this episode. Thank you for tuning in. Love for you to subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. Comments are always welcome, and I try to answer each and every one of them as soon as I can. But that's it for me today. I gotta go. Travels away.